Give it that doom doom. Like that, like just you like jazz. Yeah, I keep every time we were talking about doing this and stuff, talking about jazz in general. The B movie, that scene, is like, you like jazz? I can't get Seinfeld's voice out of my head.
Oh, what are you doing?
Kramer, I don't know how people like. Are you a Seinfeld fan?
Yes, I love Seinfeld.
I couldn't get behind it.
That's so funny.
Like I kept. I think it was because I found out early on, like it was before the episode. I don't know when they had the episode that was Seinfeld talking about how like they pitch the show.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
it's like it's a show about nothing. It's like that's never gonna work.
Right.
It's like, nah, it's fine. Let's talk about it. It's fine.
Why am I watching it?
Yeah, it's like if it's a show about nothing.
Because it's on TV.
It's
Not yet.
yeah, such a early fourth wall break.
There's so well, I guess I can save this for the actual podcast. But there's
We're rolling, aren't we?
Oh, we are?
Yeah.
Oh, shoot. Okay. I thought we were going to turn off the
No, we found that it's like
Is it better that way?
more light. We got a little white like wash on us. And
Okay,
then the
cool.
warm, so it's like we're still learning.
Cool. Yeah.
We're figuring it out.
Good. I'm glad I didn't say anything like super bad. Like,
Well, yeah.
I hate anyway, that's how I feel about those people. No, I'm kidding.
Right.
But so speaking of like jazz, right? So arguably the greatest drummer of all time, Buddy Rich. You know, straight ahead, not straight ahead jazz, but you know, more of a jazz drummer. There are these tapes from when he was a bit older in life of somebody in his band while they were on tour. They would record him just eviscerating his band members. Like he'd be on there talking about how they're terrible and they're gonna get fired and this, that, and the other. This is like way later in his
Yeah.
life, and Buddy was kind of known for, you know, being a little more,
Like critical towards like people or
yeah, critical and just kind of overall just being somewhat of like a hard person to work with, you know.
yeah.
So there were a few jokes that Jerry Seinfeld ripped off, like just took them completely from these Buddy Rich tapes. And there's, I mean, you know, y'all could look it up if for the action for it to be actually really funny, because like I'm gonna butcher everything.
Yeah.
But yeah, check out like Jerry Seinfeld, Buddy Rich
Rip
on
off.
YouTube. Yeah. And there's like 3 or 4 jokes in the show that came right from those Buddy Rich tapes.
I would have
Yeah.
never. That's a crossover I never saw. That was not on my bingo card.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. So, and I mean stuff like one of he's having an argument with one of his bandmates, and Buddy points at him and he goes, "This guy, this is not my kind of guy."
Not my not my guy. Dude.
And so there's a whole thing with well, anyway, I'll let Seinfeld fans watch it. It's funny.
Well, you know, and kind of leading into that, so today's episode's special. Like teaching me, like, hey man, if you really like want to know some like really cool like music concepts, like dive into this stuff.
Yeah.
And like you know, one of the things is this episode, I just kind of wanted you to come on and just share all the knowledge that you can, and like just like you would to like a casual like me.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I have my own like misconceptions of jazz. Like going off of like Buddy Rich, like I think of jazz musicians as these just super hard nosed, just absolutely everything's got, you know, a precise like intention behind it, and it's like, oh, you thought that was a wrong note? No, it's just an extended seventh chord, and it's like it fits in with this because of that, and like like in my opinion, like those top notch jazz players, to their credit, are just absolutely top notch musicians.
Yeah.
Across the board.
Yeah.
And so, kind of leading into that, kind of explain like what was your tutelage, if you
Sure.
will, in jazz.
Yeah. So back from when I first started playing, my grandfather really got me into like big band jazz. You know, stuff from the 30s and the 40s first. And one of the first songs I heard, I'll demonstrate later on the drums, but it was a song called "Sing, Sing, Sing" by the Benny Goodman Orchestra, and it's basically like a 8-minute long drum solo with band stuff put inside of it. It's a great tune. They used it actually for the Chips Ahoy cookies commercial for a long time, like in the like mid to late '90s. I remember it
Okay.
Just because that's when I was starting to kind of get into music, you know. So I was like, hey, that's Sing 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 from,
You
you
just
know.
like I wonder if it was that kind of thing where it was like, because I can't remember what the cutoff is. It's like after I think like so many years, there's a copyright like the law is like it's like hey, you can only hold on to this copyright for so many years.
Oh well, I mean, they paid for it,
Okay,
sure,
cool, yeah.
but it's what? Well, I mean, this was 15 years ago when I was in college, but at that time, I don't know if it's different now, but it's life of the composer plus 75 years.
Okay.
So after you die, if you wrote the song
Mm-hmm.
after 75 years after you die,
Because
is
that's
when it
what I
becomes
understood
public domain.
with like classical music. That's why everyone like classical music is kind of just widely played because it's like hey, like we don't have to like pay a fee to people and stuff because they've been way dead for a long time.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, there are a lot of stories too about even recently bands that some local bands that I know of that really hit on a national major scale, Grammy-winning bands that signed bad deals
Oh
and
yeah.
they don't really own the rights to their music. So this is coming from a long line of shysters, basically, people being like, they're might be envious of someone's musical talent. They don't have any themselves, and so they steal it from them,
Yeah.
to make so that they can make money for the rest of their lives. But recently there's been a lot more for artist rights as well, and just read the fine print. Get a good lawyer if you're given a contract or anything in music to sign. Like, get a good entertainment lawyer, have them look through it, and like tell them to explain it to you like you're 5 years old.
Yeah.
Honestly, like, what is this doing for me? Is it good or bad?
It's
So
it's like if you were in my position and I'm paying you. So tell me, if you were in my position, would you take this deal? Why wouldn't you? And like, yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah.
But I mean, like with jazz and stuff, I feel like it's kind of like blues and jazz. Like there's the whole separation, like and the combination of that, because the big band stuff from like the 1930s, you said right?
Hmm.
Like we're talking big band is like you got like a six piece horns and everything, and like like that's kind of like when I hear big band, I think of stuff kind of like a uh, not not a not Jerry Lewis, but who am I thinking of?
Johnny Carson.
Yeah, kind of like those kind of bands and
Yeah.
stuff. Just like they have tons of musicians and
Yeah.
things like that. And I mean, when it comes to like jazz and stuff, I mean, I've heard the few jazz concerts I've been to, they play like they say, hey, this is the pieces we're playing, and it's like oh, like like Take Five's a really popular one.
Yep.
There's a lot of like jazz standards. So like is that like something in jazz that's kind of a norm? Like people take from like those like people that have written things and had it credited to their name and
Yeah.
stuff as what like people will come up and learn. Because I mean, in your school,
Right.
which you went, what was the name? It was Jackson,
University of North Florida.
North Florida.
Mhm.
I just keep thinking Jacksonville with you.
Yeah, that's where it is.
Yeah, okay, that's
Mhm.
why. So it's like in that kind of sense, like they take these musical pieces and stuff, and is that like the building blocks for you guys, or like where does jazz start from, like your like education? Like how do they bring it in?
It's a great question. They start from if well, it really depends on your level when you get there.
Hmm.
When I got to UNF, I was a little more advanced in the standards, like you talked about, and I'll
Hmm.
talk about that in a minute. But just in the standard book of jazz songs, because
Oh, we got extra light now.
my my jazz band experience in high school, so when we talk about big bands, we're talking about bands that are 18 to 22 pieces. So
Jesus.
yeah, huge. I mean, 4 or 5 trumpets, 4 or 5 trombones, 5 saxophones, full rhythm section. Oftentimes you have singers. Frank Sinatra got his start as the singer of the Tommy Dorsey big band.
Really?
And he was in the band at the same time as Buddy Rich too. But that's kind of further along. But my personal experience was I didn't have a big band high school like that. Or
Like like
the band in my school was not a band like that.
like a jazz band kind of thing.
Yeah, so it was more combo jazz, right? So more like small group. So when we think about small group, we think about like trio, quartet, quintet, maybe a sextet, but
Yeah.
smaller group of people, and the roles of everybody's a little bit different. So when I got to UNF, I was really good at playing all the small group stuff, and almost right away I placed into the top combo in my second semester of my freshman year, and then I was in the top combo the rest of the time I was there, just because I had that leg up and just knowing songs.
Yeah, you had you had the
I wasn't,
foundation.
yeah, I wasn't any better than anyone else. I was probably actually one of the weaker drummers when I first got there. You're a freshman, you don't know anything. So it wasn't even that I was that much better than anybody else. I just was fortunate enough to have that experience. And then, there were some guys that, played big band their whole high school career, and they were in the top big band all their 4 years.
Okay.
So it's just, and I placed into a decent big band. I never placed into the top one.
Yeah, because I mean, my very limited introduction to jazz was in like the middle school, high school jazz band.
Yeah.
And my high school and like the cluster of schools I went to, I give credit, like they had a very like the band directors were like, hey, look, like this can be great, but you have to let us make it great.
Yeah.
And so we need, like I was fortunate. We always had trombone, trumpet, and like at least like 4 or 5 like horn players.
Yeah.
And I switched between playing guitar and bass, and like the drummers at the time were just like kind of like you were saying, like they were just older, much more experienced.
Yeah.
And just had that extra feel. I mean, we were playing stuff like Caravan.
Yeah.
Like
Classic.
like. Like stuff I was just like,
Yeah.
oh, he's a real one.
Yeah. I mean, if you really want to hone your chops, it's kind of like classical and jazz are really the two forms, and when we go back to the early forms of jazz and just where it came from, it sort of came from orchestra.
Really?
From your Beethoven symphony, Mozart symphony, all that.
Is that just because like the music theory aspect of it, or is it?
No, that doesn't really have anything to do with it.
Okay, yeah.
It was more along the lines. Well, I mean, I guess it does in the sense of as things get older, tastes change.
Yeah.
So at one time, classical music was really all you heard. Towards the end of the 1800s into the 1900s, you had a sort of change in the style of composing, where it was a little more I can't think of the word, but newer sounding.
Yeah.
It wasn't so antiquated.
Well, and I mean, even coming from like the drumming history part of it, my drum teacher, Doc Manning's, R.I.P. Doc, great teacher. Like he was a huge, also went through jazz like school and like had a foundation in that. And he kind of in the first couple weeks of my drum lessons, like he was like, you need to understand where drumming came from.
Yeah.
Like originally, like even like I want to say like the first like what we have here today is just a standard 4-piece kit.
Right.
Like that was groundbreaking to have like one person play all those. Like I mean, in the orchestra sense, because I mean, I remember I picked up a pair of drumsticks at your house one time, and I was like, why are these drumsticks? Like, are these like marching sticks? And you're like, no, those are orchestral.
Yeah.
And he's like, please don't bang those. Those were like $40. It's like, what?
Yeah. I mean, percussion tech. Well, so to study the drum set is to study jazz, because that's really where the drum set came from. Excuse me. When we get from the 1800s into the 1900s, we have a lot of the bands shrinking in size due to just cost and.
Well, after the 1930s, the Great Depression.
Well, no, this is before that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Actually, during the Great Depression was the height of the big band era.
Really?
Yeah. So, getting way back into the turn of into the 19th century, John Philip Sousa was fairly popular. Marches,
Okay.
marching bands and stuff like that were fairly common. And then as the bands began to shrink even from that too, you had at least from drums, you had a dedicated player for every percussion instrument, right? So in a typical orchestra, even like today is this way, you have one percussionist that's a dedicated timpani player, and they're usually the section leader of the percussion section, so they get to choose who plays what. And then you have somebody that'll play the bass drum, someone that'll play the snare drum, someone that'll play mallets. Usually there might be 1 or 2 players for mallets depending on the songs or the pieces that you're playing, and then another auxiliary player, so like cymbals, triangle, tambourine, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, because
so you have like 6 people in this section, right?
Yeah.
So
just as a percussion,
just in the percussion section, you got a 6-piece band right back there. So if you're making cuts, What are you gonna where are you gonna cut? Do you need 8 second violin players? No, you maybe need 2 or 3, right?
Yeah.
Do you need 6 percussionists? No, we really only need 2 or 3. We need someone to do mallets, someone to do timpani, and then maybe one other guy. So it's like, well, you've got bass drum, cymbals, snare drum, all the other trap stuff,
Yeah.
triangle, tambourine, all that. You could put all that together, and now the one person can play all that stuff.
It's like he's got the drummer's got 4 limbs. Well, let's make him use all of them.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Because I mean, it was always the thing, and I don't know if this was also true for your like band experience in like school and stuff. Like middle school band, we always got yelled at because everyone wanted to hit the giant bass drum.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Like guys, that bass drum head costs like $200.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
don't play around with that.
And there's a way to. I mean, there's a technique for all of it. I remember when I was in middle school, we got like a big. I guess somebody wrote a big funding check for us or something like that. Like we got a ton of money one year for new instruments, and so we got all new percussion instruments. Which I mean, when I was in middle school, it was in the late '90s, early 2000s. So most of the stuff was from like the '80s.
Yeah,
you know, so
it was made
like,
different back
was,
then.
Yeah, it was time to upgrade. So one of these upgrades was a big 40-inch Zildjian symphonic gong.
Wow.
Yeah. So imagine having a bunch of
Speaking of gongs,
Yes, dude.
Sorry.
So what is that, like a 14-inch gong?
I'd probably say 14.
Yeah. So like imagine that 40 inches, right? Just your Van Halen gong.
Yeah,
You know?
anything behind like the Led Zeppelin, like I always remember seeing John Bonham have
Yeah.
that giant gong behind it, and at the end of Moby Dick, just
Yeah. So imagine like a bunch of 11 or 12-year-olds with that. So my teacher then was like, "We got some new stuff.
don't touch.
There's obviously a gong." She's like, "I'm gonna let all of you hit the gong once to get it out of your system,
and that's
and
it.
then that's it."
If I hear the gong,
yeah.
you're done.
That was the first and last time that many people got to hit a gong. But it's kind of like man, it's so powerful. Like when you and you're just like, oh man,
You can imagine why a
it's
bunch of
pretty fun.
12 and 13-year-old children was like, I want to hit that.
Yeah, right. It's a big chunk of metal
Yeah.
that's really loud. Why not?
Oh, dude, I remember just
Well, if
people.
it gets big enough, it's not just the sound. You'll feel the vibrations.
Yeah.
back off of
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
Dude, I remember in
So
Indi-
also mute the over mic.
Is it not muted?
No,
Oh, well,
I gave you one job, and
I'm sorry, Seabass.
We're still learning here.
The over's muted.
the over is not muted.
Yeah, it is. It's not even turned up.
All right. Well, I can tell you that the DAW has been picking up the over and his mic almost equally. So
Okay.
it's
Well,
gonna be rough.
can you mute it on the DAW?
At this point, maybe.
What? Yeah, we could just mute it throughout there, and we'll just. Anyway, but yeah, like problem solved. Mute.
What's that gonna do to the sound quality
Oh, it's just so it doesn't bleed, so you don't have 2 mics, kind of like having like.
in phase?
Yeah.
I mean, at this
Maybe that's
point,
what you're hearing
nothing
earlier.
Really, I'm probably gonna have to just go in and just
Delete
turn that
it.
mic all the way down, just mute that mic essentially, and
Gotcha.
DAW, so that way it's only one mic instead of both mics picking it up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
If you mute it when you render it down, it should be fine or whatnot. But
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, dude, I remember in Indiana Jones, the Raiders of the Lost, or not Raiders of the Lost Ark. It was the one where they went to like India.
Yeah.
It was like a temple or something, like Hidden Temple. I think it was a Hidden Temple movie.
Okay.
They had the opening scene. They had like a giant, like 30-foot gong.
Yeah.
That he ended up running behind, like, running from bullets and stuff.
Yeah.
I was like, bro. Like I remember thinking about that. It's just like while you're talking about the gongs, like that. If speaking of a gong, I'd want to hit really, really hard. Like,
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, kind of like going back where you're saying, like, when you time to cut things down and like trim the fat off of bands.
Sure.
Like, you take like, because honestly, when you were saying the timpani was like kind of like the leader of the band, I guess it's just because of my like association or like just being around like football and the drum line
Yeah.
people.
Mhm.
I always understood as the snare player and a drum line was like the quarterback of that kind of section or that.
Yeah, I mean, and you have different roles, and marching band is my least experience. I was in
Gotcha.
marching band for about 2 weeks in high school.
I mean, like, not for me.
Yeah, not for me. Which and there are many people that I know that went far in that world, and like it's cool what some of those guys can do with their chops and everything. Like, and I learned a lot from being in that experience. But for like the militant side of things was never really for me.
Yeah.
Um,
A little more free form.
yeah, and I did it a little bit in college. It was required. My freshman year.
Yeah.
And then I think so many people complained about it that my teacher just gave up on it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean, because like when it starts condensing down, like, for people to understand, like going from having like like you said, there's a technique, there's a precise way to play the bass drum in an orchestral scene,
Yeah.
the cymbals, the snare. Like, I mean, even the fact that you said like when I was playing with those sticks at your house that you're like, no, those are orchestral drumsticks, that they are actually tuned.
yeah,
Like they're like
Yeah.
shaved into being in a like a certain register.
they're pitch matched.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't really tune. I guess you could tune wood.
Well, I like a marimba or like the wood blocks and stuff.
That's true. Yeah.
But it's like, but even like, like there's those guys that they'll like have the perfect pitch and they'll like knock something. It's like, oh, that's a B flat.
Yeah.
It's like I can imagine like just the length and stuff, but it's like that kind of precision is awesome in the orchestral sense. And then when it comes to condensing things down, it's like do you know off like hand like when like the first like kit kind of came onto the scene as a drum like what we would call the modern drum set?
Yeah. Not exactly.
Yeah.
I would probably say like I don't know what the birth of the drum set was.
Yeah.
You know, it's like the Big Bang theory.
Yeah,
where,
it's just it
like,
happened.
Yeah. How did dogs or wolves become dogs?
It's slowly over time because we
Right.
just kept like saying, "Hey, try some of this meat." Like,
yeah, but they don't know like what the switch was.
yeah,
You know, so like I'm not exactly sure what that switch was, but it would have come in the 1910s, early 1910s, you know, because at that time, that's when you start having people like Louis Armstrong be popular, you know, with this groups called the Hot Five and the Hot Seven groups, which is just the amount of people that are in the band.
Yeah. Solid name. What are we gonna call a group? Well, we got 7 of us hot dudes in here. So
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
You guys are
right.
some hot players.
Yeah, yeah. That's exactly where it comes from.
I mean,
all that early slang, you know.
There's been definitely worse band names over time. Because I mean, like my drum teacher Doc, when he was explaining it to me, is like they literally used to have that orchestral drum, and like the guy would have the snare, a cymbal, and the drum or the bass drum, and the reason it kind of got the name the kick drum is because they would literally just kick it.
Yeah,
and it's like then you started having people put like towels and like having these special like kind of fittings onto their shoes so that way it wouldn't kick through the head.
Yes.
And stuff like that. And then someone just like, what would be easier? What if we had a mallet on it, like a hinge?
So yeah, the first bass drum pedal was manufactured, I believe, by Ludwig Drums.
That would make sense.
And like I'm probably butchering the date, but I want to say it was like 1916, 1917, something like that.
Yeah.
In that time period. And then at that time, you're also still using huge drums. I mean, your bass drum was like 28 inches. So at this point, when you're marching in a parade or like in a marching band, you have different sized bass drums.
Yeah.
Most of the drums at this point, parade drums, they call them, were like 26, 28 inches.
It's kind of depending on how much you could carry.
Yeah, exactly. And they were obviously very shallow because you had to wear it. And
Yeah.
you had to play it like that. So, if you have an 18-inch long kick drum, you're out here, and that's
and you can't
even
see
more
what's going on.
uncomfortable. Yeah. So they basically just put it on the ground, and like you said, they kicked it for a while, and then I forget who. There was someone. So there's a really great podcast out there called the Drum History Podcast.
Drum History. Yeah, you've been talking about that a lot.
Yeah,
too.
yeah. Bart Vanderzee is the guy's name that runs that whose podcast it is. But he brings on people like he had William F. Ludwig on his show. Yeah, like
the Ludwig.
Yeah, like
that Ludwig.
Legit guys. So I would definitely recommend checking out that podcast for all the erroneous facts that I give today.
Yeah.
But at some point you have the bass drum, you had the snare drum, you had smaller cymbals, you had like crash cymbals. At this time, they weren't able to make big ride cymbals.
Yeah.
That technology didn't really come around till like the early 1940s.
Because everything at that point was hand hammered and stuff.
Handmade, hand hammered, yeah. And for the most part, they were made the same way up until like I want to say the 50s was when they started to introduce like completely machine made cymbals.
Which I mean, I can't deny like the hand hammered ones definitely have that extra warmth and stuff to them. But I mean, even like on the kit today, like we got some Sabians and stuff, like just to kind of I bought them as a kit just to have as a gigging kind of kit and stuff. But it's like just moving from the orchestral like crash or the cymbals and like having that to that. I mean, that's kind of the cool part about the drums is like it's birth was out of in like, hey, we need to like have someone play all these things at once.
Yeah.
And someone just said, hey man, like I can go top to top like
So
I got four
it's-
limbs.
It started from there, yeah. And when we play, I'll kind of take you through a brief overview of like jazz drumming from then till now.
Yeah.
Some very archaic style of demonstration. But at this point, like we're still kind of like around the 1920s. Also, the recording technology at this time was not good.
Yeah.
They would literally just be all in the same room. Look up old pictures of
Giant live rooms.
recording, of recordings from that time, and you had the each instrument, like the quieter the instrument, the further you sat up towards the phonograph.
Yeah, I remember
know?
seeing like some of the like the Motown singer movies and stuff. I
Yeah.
remember seeing like how they'd have like everyone had like if it was like you had like the 4 or 5 backup singers, they'd all have like one mic, and then when it was their turn to kind of do their solo, they just step forward.
Yeah.
And then it's like step back.
Mhm.
And nowadays, being spoiled with digital like recording, it's like oh, we can just redo that. It's like
Gate.
it's just like it's like, hey man, like you better nail this because we are running out of tape.
Yeah. I mean, when you listen to some of this stuff, it's not perfect. There's
Yeah.
mistakes because like you're like, hey, we had, everyone's doing this together at the same time. So it was like if you mess up your own personal part, it's small in comparison to having everybody have to go back over and do it again.
Yeah.
And there's a few famous examples in jazz where people straight up make mistakes.
Yeah.
Like they get lost in the form and they don't know what the hell's going on. you
Yeah.
know?
And I mean, like another thing with the like, so after like you kind of get the coalition of all the drums, like being in one like unit, like it is today.
Yeah.
Like then like the role that it plays in there, because I mean everyone, I say everyone, sorry to make generalizations, but
Yeah.
like a casual like me, when you think of like a jazz drum thing, you can hear that.
Yeah.
Like the Pink Panther and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
And like, is that like, would you say that's kind of where things started out, or like, how does, like, and just before we get on the kit and stuff, like, I mean, like, what are like kind of the phases that you would like? Are there like, oh, this is the Stone Age of like jazz drumming. This is the Bronze Age. Like, this is when like we started. Like, are there
Sure.
like breakdowns in that, like from a
Yeah,
a title
yeah.
sense?
Yeah. So you have like your early jazz for going back to your Philip Sousa marches.
Okay.
And even before that, with the the slave trade and just with spirituals that slaves would sing in the field, they were based on very simple progressions. So when you look at early jazz, it's kind of a mixture of it is a mixture of African American spiritual music and rhythms and European harmony. So that it's you have this kind of meld of like really fundamental old traditional rhythms and then unique newer harmony.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's always hard to quantify what jazz actually is.
Yeah.
And I'm glad we didn't get into too into the weeds with this today because like
It's a whole other episode.
yeah, and like people pontificate about what is jazz, and that's not really the important part of it. Really, it's like if you're talking about a specific style, we'll talk about swing music, which is what you were just talking about.
Yeah.
That we call it spangalang or sprangalang on the red symbol. So swing, is I don't want you to think of jazz as being swing, right? Jazz can be swing. Jazz can also be fusion. Jazz can also be, Ginger Baker from Cream, arguably one of the first like huge rock drummers.
Yeah.
Him and John Bonham. He never even considered himself to be a rock drummer. He was a jazz drummer in his mind.
Yeah.
Because for him, jazz meant being improvisatory, and the way that he would play his solos was very much like a jazz drummer. So jazz to me is really more of like, it's not really a style so much as it is just like a way of being.
It's a concept.
It is. It is.
Jazz is just a social construct.
Yeah, also something I don't want to get into the weeds about.
Yeah, because I mean, like when you,
but that's what it is though, because and people you can get really up your own ass with like, what is this? What is this jazz? Is this blah, blah, blah? At the end of the day, like, who really cares what it is?
yeah, I mean, because that happens in a lot of musical genres too. I mean, like I've heard the term, it's like it's freeform jazz. It's like you got fast jazz. It's like
Yeah, there are different subsects of it, right?
Yeah.
So you have like your traditional, your Dixieland sort of style, which was popular from, the early 1910s through probably like the early to mid 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had your swing era, which was sort of born around, and then at the same time you have blues. Really,
Yeah.
really, the early jazz tunes and early rock and roll tunes are just blues forms.
Yeah.
And that's really a big part of it. That's the African American influence.
Yeah.
And then the Europeans kind of just named what was going on.
Put titles and like oh, this is what we're gonna call this kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because I mean, like you got like you were saying with swing. Swing is kind of what and it might be different for everybody. Like Seabass, like when you think of jazz, like what comes up to you as another kind of, I would say, more casual listener.
Any music that breaks the rules, but you can't prove it.
That's a great.
How I've always thought about jazz.
Yeah.
Because that's what it is. You hear it, and it's like,
Okay.
wait, maybe that was off, but then as you keep hearing it, nope, he's right back in. Everything's fine. So that's how I've always thought of it. Because that's also why I never understood it.
Right.
I'd like to, but I can't.
No.
Because it just goes so far off the path that I'm too structured and rigid to understand what they're even doing.
Yeah.
I think
That's a good way to put it.
I think also from from a compositional standpoint for jazz too, like what you're just talking about, stuff that breaks the rules but you don't really know how, is it's really dependent upon the melody that you're writing, right? So I had a really really good jazz composition teacher in school, and he talked more about, like, with these changes, the chord changes that you play, to not write your song based off of chord changes, but to come up with a melody
And just
right?
follow the melody.
And just follow the melody. And then from there, it's like, okay, well, so you have your melody that goes a certain way, and then within all of that, you have different notes that you're singing or playing, right? So if you're playing something in C and you play, something linear, C, D, E, F, G, well, you have C major, D minor, E minor, F, G chords to play.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, you have your upper extensions of all those chords too. So like C major 7, D minor 7, so on and so forth. So within that melody, you could be like, well, all right, I'm playing a C in the melody, but there's tons of other notes or other chords that have C in them, right?
And you can kind of branch out from there.
Yeah, so you're like, well, let me try this with C major, C major and a C. Okay, that sounds good. That sounds safe, right? But do I want it to sound like that? Do I want to hit home right now? What if I want to play an F? That gives a whole different vibe to it, So it's really more contingent upon what you're singing or what you're playing in a melodic way.
Yeah.
And if you hear you can hear accidentals, you can hear flat notes, sharp notes, and all that, and there's tons of stuff you can go from there. Different major chords, you can use your major chords and your key as a whole new key, right? So like your FAC is the 4 of C, right?
Yeah.
But it's also the 1 of F, right? So then you can borrow chords.
Yeah, I was about to say you can it's like when you look at a chord having those notes in it as individuals, and then the other chords that share those things. It's like a very beautiful puzzle piece.
It is.
That like, okay, well, like, and with the melody kind of seems like, the picture in my mind when I think of melody, is like you're going and like it's like a pencil.
Yeah.
Like if you're drawing it, it's going here. It's like da 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 da.
Exactly.
And then you hit those spots that are the notes, and then those chords like layer over it, and it's like, I mean, there's so much when it comes, and like my biggest like thing right now is like really trying to dive into understanding more music theory, because that. Like I've heard, like with the circle of fifths and all those things, like, and I think John Mayer was one of the people that kind of brought it out. He's like, he sees them in colors.
Yeah.
As a colorblind man, that's very frustrating, but I can kind of get what he's saying.
Yeah.
Like, like a backdrop of a painting has all these different colors of a Bob Ross painting of a background.
Yeah.
Like, you just see that and how all those things work, or even like with fashion. Like I've seen like there's a stylist person, like she was working with a buddy of mine. It's like, hey, let's find your like they put this like thing on your chest.
Yeah.
It's like, hey,
your color palette.
This is what works if you want the winter, summer, like all these things. And it's like that kind of, like I said, even as a colorblind person, like I can understand like, oh yeah, like me and Sebastian were talking about like beautiful goth girls earlier. It's like they have that certain dark aesthetic to it with all the different like things.
Right.
I get so terrified every time you bring me up.
Understandably so. But I mean, like with music and like that, because I think very visually.
Yeah.
Like whenever I'm writing a song and stuff, like or if I like the visualization when I hear jazz is like a rainy Manhattan like scene
Sure.
where it's like there's a guy on stage smoking a cigarette and there's like a trio just like upright bass and stuff
Mhm.
like that's like the picture that I always get is like that's jazz.
Yeah,
Everyone's
yeah.
in suits and stuff.
Right.
But I mean, even going into the improvisation.
Sounds like blues to me.
Yeah. See.
But
Yeah.
that's like you were saying earlier, like blues and jazz, like they kind of like morphed into one another, and they share so much.
Yeah.
And I mean, like you said,
Blues really came first. You could argue that blues is the first American art form, but jazz, and starting in New Orleans,
Nolans.
was not whatever.
Apparently, you're not supposed to say that in New Orleans, but
Yeah, no, it's
they can
yeah.
tell it's like you ain't from around here.
No, yeah. They'd kick your ass right away. But that's where it started from. Louis Armstrong was from New Orleans, and there were a lot of other early jazz pioneers from there too. And so they were taking blues. I mean, straight up blues. Listen to any of that stuff from that time period.
Yeah.
And that is something that has progressed through everything,
Yeah.
all different versions. So after you get out of the 20s into the Great Depression, you have the big band era, which like we talked about before, was like 18 to 22 pieces. Some of them, like the Glenn Miller Orchestra later, I think it was Glenn Miller, or maybe the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra. They added a whole string section too. So it was kind of like you're bringing back in that classical sort of influence.
And like people like Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, and stuff like they have like kind of I feel like an influence, but like I like with them in particular talking about the strings, like when a big band kind of takes those jazz influences, it's like you get like a classic "Fly Me to the Moon" and stuff. You have that, or like there's so many songs from those kind of genres where it's like, hey, like there's an orchestral piece here that and it just seamlessly flows from the orchestral melody into like the trumpets back into the main lead vocals.
Yeah. That's brilliant arranging.
Yeah.
You have guys like Nelson Riddle back in the day that arranged a lot for Frank and for bands of that era. And they really do make it as seamless as possible. And really, I think something else too. I had this debate with a friend of mine, and that I ended up losing, because he was right. And he made the point that there are a lot of jazz tunes in the standard book that are show tunes from like old Broadway shows, musicals, and things like that.
Really?
Yeah, many of them. I would say a good like 90% of standard tunes that we have played throughout the course of jazz have been from show tunes.
Do you think that's just because that was more publicly accessible to people and stuff?
Probably.
Like, and that's why it kind of bled over. It's like because as musicians, we try to play what people know.
Yeah.
It's like people go to because I mean even like with you think about distribution systems back in like the early 1900s, like you couldn't go down to a record store.
Right.
You'd have to go to the jazz club and like see the band and stuff, and that was like the huge appeal of it.
Yeah.
And I mean, there was at best you could like have everything written down on the sheet music, and then that you take that to every city if you had musicians there that could read and sight read and stuff.
Yeah.
And that's like. Like I saw a story the other day about music history, like one of the like pages I've been following and stuff recently, where it's like they found like this whole just cavern full of like sheet music that's just we don't know who wrote this. It's like this is just never been like stuff that's never been recorded before.
Right,
Like
right.
it was pre-recording, like I think what was it? Edison made the first wax tube that they recorded on for the
I think so. Or he took credit for it.
Well, yeah, he would never. He
Right.
would never do that. But that's so funny too. But I mean, like you think about like that, and it's like people go to like the Broadway or like the big show tunes and stuff. I mean, even like not really
Well, I mean, you're also Broadway.
Yeah.
You're looking at stuff too at a time where you had the radio as your
that's the main
entertainment. You didn't have TV at that point. You had movies, but they were few and far between, and they would come and go. So you had shows, Broadway shows and off-Broadway shows and touring shows that would vaudeville.
Yeah.
So that style was very popular then because it was accessible to people, but they were still using, like, I'm teaching one of my piano students right now. I forget the name of the song.
Man, that was one thing
maybe it's on my Spotify, but it's a tune from The Music Man. And it's a jazz tune. it's a great tune. The name escapes me off the top of my head, but we're playing through it, and it's like it's in the key of E flat, but you have like uh, F major, E diminished, stuff that doesn't fit.
Yeah, it's like it gives that
in the
tension.
key. Yeah,
Yeah.
and then you look at the melody, and it's like, well, they're going in and out of the key of E flat, but it's so well written, and it's such a pretty melody that you don't even really notice all the complex stuff going on behind it.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of like in kids shows right now. You know, my daughter's 2, so we're watching a lot of Bluey and Dora the Explorer and stuff like that. So in these shows, you know, you have to really keep the parents entertained, because the parents are the ones that are watching these shows with these kids. Like, you put anything on TV, my daughter's gonna love it. Doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah,
you know?
she's like, oh, there's pictures and moving.
Yeah, and songs and all that. So it's like you got to keep something for the adults to not blow their brains out while they're watching this stuff every day, right? Every day you're gonna watch the same stuff every single day.
Hey, at least the handful of times I've been over at your house and your daughter's watching some stuff. It's like she's really hooked on Goofy movie right now, which I'm like, yes, extremely Goofy movie. I love that.
Goofy movie and Toy Story. She loves Toy Story.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, we're raising her right. Don't worry. But you know, there's certain like little Easter eggs in there for adults where it's like, if you're paying attention to it, it's clever.
Yeah.
You know, like one of my daughter's other favorite shows is Peppa Pig, and there's a character on there, Mr. Wolf. He's the construction worker, so he builds stuff. So Mr. Wolf goes and builds the pigs 3 houses. One of them's made out of straw, one of them's made out of sticks, and the other one's made out of bricks. And
But they're friends.
Yeah. I mean, he's not trying to eat them.
He's
obviously.
a vegan wolf.
This is a television. This is a kids show. You know, this isn't
Brothers Grimm and stuff.
Yeah, this isn't American Horror Story Peppa Pig. You know, so it's just a legit, you know, whatever. And like, that's clever. Like, she doesn't get it. She doesn't understand that yet. You know, she's not old enough to get it. But it's like, 3 pigs, sticks, hay, and bricks. Like, it's, you know, we get that as adults. It's like, you know, it's clever. So with these show tunes, I feel like that's kind of what these writers do, is they throw in all this really complex and sophisticated harmony, but over this really nice, pretty melody, where it's like, well, you're sneaking in a bunch of really cool stuff that you don't realize is there, you know? And then you'd kind of take that same idea with jazz influence bands throughout, you know, getting in from the 30s and the 40s is really the height of the big band era. Getting into the 50s, actually the Music Union is what, I will die on this hill.
Okay.
The Music Union is what killed the big band, because they raised the rates and made it way too expensive to keep big bands on the road after the war.
Yeah.
So in the late 40s, you still had some big bands, but they were starting to become fewer and farther between, and you had, once again, a consolidation of the players, right?
Yeah.
So from the 50s, you still have very popular big bands. Tommy Dorsey passed away in 1955, but his band he had a huge band up till the day he died. You know, Count Basie, same thing. You know, big band. He scaled down a little bit for a little while, but it didn't go well for him. So he was like, I'm gonna stick with this. You know,
Stick with what works.
You had certain people. Buddy Rich had his own band at this time, which didn't work the first time that he tried it. So the big bands were still somewhat popular, but now you start having, you know, the drummer playing with all the other horn players on different nights of the week somewhere.
Yeah.
You know, my grandpa tells me the story. He played drums in Chicago for a while in a big band. And he said, like, after the first audition that he went in there, played pretty well and made the band. And then he was working for a while, and then, you know, one of the horn players would come over and be like, "Hey, what are you doing Thursday? I got a gig." And then the bass player would come over and it's like, "Yeah, I got a hit on Sunday." And he had, you know, from this one band, he had like 15 bookings because they were all playing smaller gigs, you know. So you had these guys that are like, well, all right, I don't have to go out on the road with the big band, play these parts the same way every single time. I can go out and have my own group, you know. So you have the start of, you know, combo jazz. Miles Davis started to get really popular during this time in the late 40s, you know, with John Coltrane. And then through the 50s, you have kind of the tapering off of the big bands and sort of the rise of the small group. And then in the 60s, just with all the turmoil that was going on in the U.S., you know, jazz started to get a little more aggressive. And then so you have, like, throughout the early part of the 60s, also rock and roll is coming over, which the Beatles and the early rock and roll pioneers were all influenced by jazz and blues musicians over here.
Yeah.
So they were basically just playing like jazz and blues tunes louder and faster.
With little, and I mean, dude, like I remember, like you were talking about, like the drummer from Cream. I mean, even John Bonham, like he got to start out as a jazz drummer and
Yeah.
stuff. To, like,
Yeah, his parents were big band musicians.
yeah,
Mhm.
and I mean, like that influence is undeniable when you listen to it, and it's like that's kind of a good way to put it. It's like, okay, we're going to play the bluesy, like if you listen to like something like from Muddy Waters,
Yeah.
or like Lead Belly and stuff like that.
Mhm.
It's like you can see those same chord transitions, and maybe it's in a different key, but it's the same intervals,
Yeah.
and stuff. But it's like at a faster tempo.
Well, you can there's also the argument, which is I think true, that Led Zeppelin basically just ripped off a bunch of blues musicians at first, which they did. Let's just be honest. Like, they ripped it off, which is kind of the point to our project. It's like everyone's ripping someone off. It's not like, you know, you don't want to make it too obvious.
Yeah. Well, and
But-
it's like kind of like with the color painting pictures and stuff. I remember like I was dating this girl that was like really into painting,
Yeah.
and I was having like this horrible writer's block, and I kept running into that problem, which a lot of songwriters I think find. It's like, oh, I was playing this and I loved it, and then I realized that was another song.
Yeah,
already. And it's, she's like, well, yeah, but you can't copyright like colors. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's like just because you painted a scenic background, and you painted a picture of a woman on a train station,
Right.
like platform, like you paint some picture. It's like as long as you're not making the exact same picture with like different colors, which in a lot of ways some like musicians, not saying anything, not hating,
Yeah.
just saying, but it's like with Led Zeppelin, a lot of people like talk about Greta Van Fleet.
Mhm.
It's like they're just doing Led Zeppelin tunes.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, yeah, but they're also, that's good company to
Yeah.
be in.
Yeah.
Like if you can be considered the next like coming of Led Zeppelin, like
Yeah. Right.
yeah, run with that. But I mean, like, I remember even my drum teacher, he talked about, it's like you can't really copyright a drum beat. Like,
Yeah.
it's like it's a beat. It's like it's you can't say, oh, I own the wheel. Like you guys have to pay me for all of the wheels that you make and stuff. It's like there's some give and take.
You
on
could
that.
argue that there are certain drum beats that make songs that where the drummer should be credited with songwriting because it made the song.
I mean, I've seen TikToks
but
and
I agree with
stuff
that.
like where it's like the sugar we're going down to. It's like people are like,
Or anything that Neil Peart ever. I mean, Neil Peart wrote lyrics for Rush too.
Yeah.
But another drummer, amazing rock drummer, who was main influence was Buddy Rich.
yeah,
So you have the jazz influence, and I think a lot of it had to do with just the fact that there was nothing else going on for those guys at that time. You
Yeah.
know, because like Neil Peart, I don't know exactly when he was born, but I imagine he was born in the 40s or 50s. So
yeah.
at that time period, you don't really have too much other than just jazz, So that's the only thing really that you have to consume, right? So it's really just like now the early rock musicians were just taking jazz and doing it their own way.
Yeah.
It wasn't like they were trying to invent anything new, but
we're
they
just-
did, right?
We're just going to paint this picture louder, faster, harder.
Yeah, exactly. And then from there, you have, in the 70s, you have the rise of fusion, and soul and funk and all that stuff too. Sort of like an answer to rock and roll. You have
Yeah.
hip hop that starts to really get popular in the 80s, which is from jazz because
Well, and that brings it into like a good question too about like because a lot of like hip hop and rap people like the sampling stuff that's been going on these days.
Mhm.
Like there's so many people that talk about like they do breakdowns of like like that part from that Jay-Z song or that part from that Kendrick Lamar song.
Mhm.
They took like a 5-second thing from this one old jazz standard.
Yeah.
Like maybe pitch shifted it, did some cool stuff, chopped it up. And I'm not saying it's not like that's still they did a lot of work on it. It's like it's not like they're just rapping over like a jazz tune, which that would be kind of fun to like see happen. But
So the first American form of music is jazz.
agreed.
It's true. It's
Yeah.
fact. The second is hip hop.
You can debate it in the comments if you guys don't believe it.
Yeah, no, it's fine. You can argue with me all you want, but that's the first American art form or music form anyway is jazz. The second one is R&B and hip hop, which also came from jazz because what you had in the like early part of the 70s is in New York especially. You had these people that would play jazz records, and then they would loop a certain section of it, right? So they would loop a section where it was just like the band playing together, and then you would have the MCs rap over that part.
Yeah.
And then that's how that started, was you were taking old jazz and sort of early soul and funk records too, and just looping a certain section of it, and then you come up with your own melody over top of it. So
Yeah.
that's jazz as hell.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, like you're taking something that already exists and you're putting something else on top of it. Like that's one of the more jazzy things you can do. You know?
Agreed. Because I mean, yeah, dude, and especially when it comes into like I've heard like a record or a recording studio. One of the things he's like, yeah, I mean, you just gotta steal. I hate using the word steal, but it's like I like to say, oh, we were inspired by
Yeah.
that song. It's like, yeah, I mean, dude, you pull inspiration from a thing, and it's like you just do it your own way. If you just do it your own way enough, like with enough you in there, it's like, yeah, okay, that was the same chords, or it's like I love doing the inverting,
Yeah.
or like playing chords backwards
Mhm.
and like changing up the tempo a little bit. It's like you can do little things, and it's like if it resonates with you, it resonates. That's music.
Yeah.
And same way, it's like like what is jazz? Jazz is just it is what it is. It's
Yeah.
like if it comes out this way, and
It is what it is. That's the best. That's literally the best.
what is jazz? Jazz is jazz.
Jazz. It is what it is.
Yeah, dude. And I'm just,
Actually, so Louis Armstrong had a great quote about that too when somebody asked him about jazz, and he said, "If you have to ask, you'll never know.
it's like you'll know it.
You'll know it. You'll absolutely know it." And
I-
then, so from this from this point in the '70s, and this is a very brief overview of all this stuff too, but you have like fusion getting really popular, but then you also have a callback to the '40s small group bands because there were many of those musicians still alive at this point that were still playing straight ahead. So in the mid to late '70s, you had kind of a resurgence of the small group combo jazz type of stuff, and then through the '80s, it's really weird because you have really prominent musicians like Herbie Hancock and people like that started playing totally electronic music, like Rocket.
Yeah.
He hates that song, hates it.
It's always the ones that you hate that it's like, well, we all love it.
Yeah,
You can play it for the rest of your life.
And I mean, yeah, and it was groundbreaking at the time, especially the video. The
Yeah.
video it's creepy now, but like at the time it was kind of cool. But throughout this whole time, you have people that are still playing swing, playing jazz. Traditional jazz. A lot of them moved over to Europe actually because
Really?
Europeans have, and still to this day, have a huge appreciation for jazz music. Many jazz musicians that I know personally do stuff in Europe way more than they do stuff over here.
It's funny you say that. I remember my family when we moved from like my childhood home. One of the guy that ended up buying it because like we had a big unfinished basement, and me and my dad. I mean, I was a kid. I was holding the hammer and like stuff. I was just helping, being his
Right.
little helper.
Yeah.
And like in elementary school and stuff, we ended up year over year just kind of making improvements to the unfinished basement part.
Right.
Eventually got it pretty well finished, but then like that there was like what was the workout room
Uh-huh.
slowly came like my first studio.
Right.
And like it was awesome. I look back on it and I was like, I was super fortunate to have that space to
Yeah.
just start and have like like my sisters had their art room and
Yeah.
on the other
yeah,
side,
Yeah.
and they were trying to do their artsy stuff or whatever, like what they were doing, and then I'm on the other side just banging away, and it's just like the neighbors next door is like, he's getting better. He's really doing great. He's getting a lot better.
I had my neighbors tell me to close my windows once.
It's like, hey, we're not trying to stop doing what you're doing. Just maybe close the window.
Be quiet.
Yeah. But I mean, like the guy that ended up one of the biggest selling points is like, so I'm in like middle school at this point,
Mhm.
and yeah, it was like sixth grade. We moved out of that house, but all the way up to that point, my dad and I like made improvements to that side, put some carpet, some drywall, and just had the drum set and like some amps and stuff in there. And he's like, dude, like I think like this is like your studio. And he's like, well, I'm a jazz musician, and he gave me a CD and awesome stuff. I mean, I was a kid at the time, didn't appreciate it as much as I could have.
Yeah.
But I mean, like he was talking about how he was like going on tour in Europe, and I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Are you famous? He's like, no.
No, not at all. I'm going to make the next 6 months rent.
And yeah, and like
Um,
traveling from Sweden to like Stockholm and all that, and
Yeah.
it's like, and that's funny you say like Europe has that appreciation for it, and
Japan too. Japan loves
it's really
American jazz. Loves it.
the very limited out of the country experience that I have is in Eastern Europe,
Mhm.
and they were super big on like rock.
Yeah.
Like, and they were like showing me stuff. I'm like, this is kind of older stuff, but I mean, it's like I love it. Like,
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
like, dude, can you play this? And I was like, yeah, I can play. They're like, oh my god.
Yeah,
like,
stuff doesn't reach over there as
It-
quickly as it does
and
in other
it's
places.
so funny how like even just like in America specifically, as like like we were saying, like it's the original like jazz and blues are like that's like the American original music and stuff, and even how like geographically stuff changes because you got like like the Harlem Renaissance is another big part in like music history.
Mhm.
You got the Delta like blues and stuff, and it's like I can't imagine like I feel like the environment is a part of that creation of
Yeah.
those
yeah.
two things.
Yeah, yeah. And within your swing and jazz categorizations, you have different categorizations of that as well. Where like in the same way as hip hop, you have East Coast and West Coast.
Yeah.
And jazz is the same way. You have East Coast and West Coast. And so East Coast music is more of your hard bop blues influence, really really swinging kind of stuff. Your West Coast influence is a little, to my ear, it's more classical influence, more so than straight ahead jazz.
Okay.
Where there's still that improv part of it, but it's not quite as, it doesn't go as hard. Right?
Yeah.
So like a famous example of each. So East Coast musician would be someone like a Miles Davis or a John Coltrane. Those guys grew up in Philly. They lived in New York, and they played that hard bop style at one point. They both kind of switched and did their own thing. But West Coast wise would be someone like Stan Getz.
Okay.
So you check out like Stan Getz, The Girl from Ipanema is a great example.
Oh yeah, I know that one.
And that's a crossover. That's like one of the first crossovers, is because he did that with all Brazilian musicians.
Well, and that's like when I listen to Frank Sinatra, and like I've heard a version where all of a sudden he starts speaking what I thought was Spanish, but I guess it's from Brazil, it's Portuguese.
Yeah.
But it's like even like that kind of stuff. I think like with language, like have you ever heard like people that record a song and then they try to record it in a different language?
Yeah.
It's that part of it's first off impressive.
Yeah.
But it's like I remember watching. Did you ever see that TV or the movie The Wonders?
Oh yeah, yeah.
I remember
that. I'm sorry. That Thing You Do.
That thing, yes, That Thing You Do.
Cut that out, please.
Yeah, the movie That Thing You Do.
Yeah.
Like I remember there was a scene they had that one hit, and they're like, "I'm not recording this in Spanish,"
Yeah.
and like it's because the guy was having frustrations with it. But I mean, I think that's another cool thing with jazz is because of the rhythm and stuff on it. It can give a little more nuance to like how the language influences the flow.
I mean, as cliche as it is, too, music is a universal language, you know, and it's the same thing with these types of crossovers. Is that then you had the emergence of bossa nova and samba, which was created in the '60s as a sort of in conjunction with West Coast jazz.
Yeah.
So you have all these different side roads. You have your traditional jazz from the early 1900s, which then kind of was still around. That stayed around the whole time. And for each of these groups, you have your purists that only play that style of music, right?
There's
So,
always
like,
those guys.
Yeah, so like Louis Armstrong up until he died played the same style. He didn't really ever get into the hard bop stuff.
Yeah.
But because that was his bag. His bag was that traditional jazz type stuff. And then you have guys like Count Basie, who pretty much only did the big band, and then you have guys like Miles Davis, who pretty much only did small groups.
Yeah.
So you have like certain people that, and then they stayed that way,
Yeah.
right? So like Count Basie, for like in the late '40s, due to just money and just not having the budget, had to cut his band down. But eventually he put more money towards it and had a big band for the rest of his career because that was his style.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you made a good point one time and about Duke Ellington.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah, Duke. Yeah, same.
Like he's like you made a point. It's like how do someone asked him, I think in an interview, you said like, how do you keep such a big like band and all these musicians showing up? It's like I pay them.
Yeah,
I pay them to do a job and they show up and do it. And
Yeah.
they get paid.
To keep a band together, you have to have a gimmick. My gimmick is to pay them money.
Yeah, that was the line. But yeah, dude. I mean, and there's so much. And I think what we'll do is I'm definitely excited because speaking of like bossa nova, like all the different stuff. Let's hop on the kid and let's kind of run through some stuff. So we're going to take a quick second, get everything queued up for that.
Sounds good.
And dude, I can't wait to just like because that was the cool thing. Like when we started making this idea of like what we're going to do for like jazz and stuff. I'm like, okay, well, first off, let's get Nico over here, and then just kind of explain the different stuff like that, know. And for y'all that don't know, it's like he's also a very, very good music teacher. So this is a little like little blurb for his music teaching stuff. So if you guys are looking for it, you can find him at your website, which is again
NicoLembomusic.com.
Cool. So let's go ahead and we'll get the drums queued up. And guys, be easy on us. We're working on a very limited budget, so we're doing our best with a kick mic and overhead. And so if it's not perfect, it's not perfect.
This is actually perfect for jazz.
Yeah, I was about. Yeah, you know what? Just cut that out. This is perfect. This is planned. This is.
Yeah. No.
I was
And
about to say, what were they using in the 40s? They had one mic just over the
Yeah.
guy. That was it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They didn't
It's
do
like Jared,
anything
you're
special.
too loud. Take a couple steps back.
Exactly.
Now keep going. Now out the door. Now
Cool.
up this curb.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Yeah. Right.
All right. Cool.
When people talk about jazz drum sets,
Why is that?
can you bring a jazz kit? Because
For people who don't know, the jazz kit is
That-
usually a 4-piece.
yeah, that's what they mean. They mean less drums. And usually I'll say yes and smile and just bring a 4-piece drum set. I don't let 99% of the things that bug me actually make it through.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, just yes, okay.
Yeah. Sure.
Anything can be a jazz drum set. If you look at different drum sets of jazz players throughout the years, you have
Well, I was going to say, like, because I mean, like when I started thinking of like the expansion from the jazz kit, is
Yeah.
the first thing I think of is like the extra floor tom.
yeah,
And-
yeah. And even that isn't really it either. I mean, it is, but in the early part of the drum set, so let me just briefly talk about some
Yeah.
history, right? So you had sort of like actually, I have some
Ooh, he's got some toys.
Yeah, I do.
He's brought some trinkets.
some newer versions of some. Say again?
Oh, no, he's just telling me, it's like, Jared, get in the frame.
Oh. So stuff like this, where we have cowbells, wood blocks.
Yeah.
So this is a blue LP wood block. This is made out of synthetic material, but sounds.
Like, kind of supposed to imitate a clave.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And then so also a big job for percussionists. I'm gonna put this here for now. A big job for drummers and percussionists around the turn of the century was silent movies,
Okay.
because in silent movies you had musicians that would play
Because,
along with the movie because you didn't have any talking in it, right?
yeah.
So you had, if somebody was walking, you know,
Or like the coconuts in the Monty Python.
exactly, right, right, or whatever they would play. And
Someone
then
walks up to a door and, like, gives a little.
exactly, yeah, or someone gets hit in the head, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So you have all these noise makers. That was kind of the job of the drummer at first, was to kind of play along with.
The original Foley.
This would have been like a march scene.
Whereas they take the guy up to the gallows to be hung.
Exactly right, and then whatever, So
Yeah.
you're following along with the movie. That's really advanced, but I mean, it's really advanced. I mean, for that time period, that's not how I meant.
I know what you mean. I got you.
But like they were playing just more along with what the movie was doing, because we didn't have cymbals of this size until the 40s at least. Most of the time that we played, time patterns that we played, were played on the snare drum and the bass drum. So. Kind of your basic traditional jazz starting point.
Okay.
So what I'm doing, and everybody played traditional grip, which I play about 80% of the time. But you also had your hi-hat, which at the time was called the low boy, because it didn't come up this high. It came up to about
Really?
here. Yeah, they didn't have the technology for it yet,
Ah.
and there wasn't any reason to play that way.
That.
Which is why I think, anyway, why drummers cross their hands,
Really?
because in the early days you would play your left foot on the low boy, but you didn't play with your hand. So when they invented the hi-hat stand and basically just moved it up, then instead of having to relearn how to play this way, which at that time you didn't play match grip. You didn't play match grip until after the Ed Sullivan Show with the Beatles. Honestly, like
Really?
that was like kind of like the turning point because at that point traditional grip was the only way to play because from a drumming perspective,
It came from the marching snares.
the marching snare, which would kind of hang at your side.
Yeah.
So you had to cross your arm over instead of going like this because it would knock into the drum as you were walking.
Yeah.
So the drum was angled on your side, so you angled your arm.
And that's kind of what was it not Buddy Rich, but like a lot of those guys, they also had like the tilted snare drum still.
Yeah. So when you and since that was the only way to play, snare drums were set up that way. And then it wasn't until much later that they invented the snare drum tilter, where you could have it flat.
Oh, okay.
And then once you're able to tilt your snare drum flat, see, like the hardware for the drums was way behind the actual drums themselves.
Yeah.
So that needed to catch up, and in many ways it has. Companies like Yamaha that makes good everything.
Yeah.
And Pearl, they're like really ahead of the pack on their hardware stuff.
They're a little behind on motorcycles, but
Pearl, yeah, about 100 or so years. But from there, you just played. So you have that sort of swanky, sort of drunk feel.
yeah,
for lack of a better term. And then this pattern, which is Bo Diddley, came sometime later. But this pattern right here is a 3/2 clave.
Okay.
It's a 3/2 son clave, which this is the basis of a lot of New Orleans type music. You hear that that sort of yeah, and then sometimes they'll shorten it to just that first part and just repeat that. So you hear examples of this in even later music by bands like the Meters,
Yeah.
who were a New Orleans funk band, where Hey Packaway, which is a famous song from them. That's legit just the first part of that.
Wrong note there, but yeah.
No such thing as wrong notes in jazz.
that
There actually are such things as wrong notes in jazz.
That's a joke for anyone trying jazz. It's like, because it's like that's the funny thing. It's like you run from like that and stuff. So like even like the New Orleans like kind of jazz thing. Because I mean that's another like I'm playing just essentially like what I would consider my bluesy stuff. Just
New Orleans music is a whole thing unto itself.
Oh,
It's,
yeah.
It's a whole different style.
Well, and like when you think about the New Orleans, like Mardi Gras and stuff, they're marching through the streets, so it kind of ties back into what we were saying earlier, kind of marching band stuff. So it's like keeping that little shuffle and keeping everyone moving at the same pace. You know, it's like your body becomes the click track. You're just like, as long as you're moving in time, like you're probably playing in time.
That's probably one of the best things that you could say about playing in time. Your body becomes a click track. Honestly, that I don't think you realize how
profound
that actually is. That
I usually don't.
What you just said, but That's absolutely true because the beginning of parts of jazz and music were to dance to.
Yeah. Well, that's like the swing stuff. Like,
yeah. So from there we'll talk about swing.
let's swing, baby.
That style of drumming was played for a long time, even up through the swing era. Honestly, one of the song that I heard that made me want to be a drummer was a song called "Sing Sing Sing" by the Benny Goodman Big Band, and the drummer was a drummer by the name of Gene Krupa, who was sort of the first like celebrity drummer.
You said it was the Benny Good?
Benny Goodman.
Okay.
Yeah, Benny Goodman Big Band. There's tons of versions of this song.
Yeah, I was like, oh, maybe I'll just try to play it. And it's like, oh my god, which version?
Yeah, any one of them is good, but anything that says like original recording or like from 1937 or 38.
Yeah.
That song starts out with the drum. They used to call it a jungle groove.
Ooh.
On the floor tom.
Give it that doom doom.
In this era of drumming, you have typically, I've seen many swing drummers, Gene Krupa, Buddy Rich, kind of play the same sort of setup, where they would have one rack tom, two floor toms, kick drum, snare drum, and then they'd have like 3 or 4 smaller cymbals up here.
Okay.
Towards the end of the 30s, into the 40s is when. So now you still hear that swinging.
Okay. It's not so straightforward.
Which he does some of that in that solo too. If you listen to it, it's really, really cool. Like you don't realize how many sounds you can get out of a floor tom until you listen to that track. It's amazing. Actually, that beat was inspiration for Alex Van Halen later on, because Gene Krupa was one of Alex Van Halen's favorite drummers.
Are you about to say this is what kind of led him to kind of make Hot for Teacher?
Yeah.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. So, I mean, this song was kind of his interpretation.
Just really fast. Little did he know what he was going to inspire.
Well, and those guys were born in a time where jazz was your main pop music. So that was what was on the radio. And the Van Halen family was very musically oriented. But without getting too into the weeds into Eddie and Alex Van Halen, that sort of feel, right?
Yeah.
So when we're talking about jazz and swing, it's more about the feel, which is why like when people talk about like what cymbals or drums are good for jazz, and the answer is any of them.
Whatever tool works for the job.
It really depends on how you play it too.
Yeah.
Like this ride cymbal would not be my first choice for a jazz gig if I had a choice.
You go bigger, you think? Or small?
Not necessarily.
Or just darker?
I would go so what these cymbals actually are, and there's no hate, but this is what they actually are. These are the cheapest made cymbals that you could play on a gig.
Yeah, that's why I bought them.
Make them sound good. Yeah, and that's what they are. So like they sound great for that purpose, right? Personally, I would prefer. So this is a 20-inch ride, which I have several 20-inch rides.
And for those wondering, it's the XSR.
XSR from Sabian, yeah. lesson 2. These drums sound really good. Like those sound like legit drums. In the studio, you wouldn't know the difference between that and a $5,000 drum set.
Hey man,
So
it's what we strive for here at the Strange Herd Studio.
It's all in how you play and tune and maintain your drums.
Well, and it's funny you say that because I've also heard a lot, like Jack White would talk about this when he was on It Might Get Loud.
Yeah.
He was talking about how there is a certain, and even like other like studio engineers and stuff will talk about like these prolific guitar players, which I am not there yet. But
maybe one day.
Well, maybe one day, but it's like, you know, you just like you play just even like, you know, just You Really Got Me.
Yeah.
It's like, and then you know, Van Halen covered that one going off of that, but it's like, hold on, I got it set to a jazz thing. Let me do. I had a preset. It was more clean, mellow tone, but it's like, you know, it's
we all know what it means when we use the descriptor.
Yes, thank you. But it's like, you know, you hear like a just even like bar chords, just like, you know, some plays like that, or even just like how they would bend the strings and stuff, kind of like with the drums. It's like you can play that a certain way, but if you go, you know, it's like that's but you get.
Yeah. It's all in how you attack that specific.
And I mean,
portion of it.
and then like I've talked to a lot of drummers about, like, you know, it's like, hey man, like, could you do something besides a rim shot?
Yeah.
Which for those who don't know, like, a rim shot is your stick and the snare hitting the rim and the head at the same time.
So the actual correct way of doing it from a classical perspective to get it even each time. Put your left hand on the head where it's touching. I guess I can keep this on for this. But you take your in this case I'll take my left hand stick and put it dead stroke on the snare drum. So I'm pressing firmly and I'm having the stick touch both the center of the head and the rim, and then I'm gonna take my right hand and just play it like that. That's classically how you play a rim shot.
Yeah, you're hitting the stick itself.
Yeah, because if you're gonna go like that, when you're playing the drum set, if you go, it's not a big deal. But in classical percussion, where that might be the only time you hit the drum,
That was your one
if
chance.
you go, oh, done.
All
that
right.
sounds terrible. So as a way for it to sound even, you just go like that.
Yeah, kind of the safe choice.
Yeah. If and especially because you don't want to put too many dents in your $40 drumstick. Which the reason for that is that they're pitch matched. But anyway, so what I just played was that Spring Lang.
Sorry, I had to do it.
Now check this out.
You can go for. You can leave it on too if you're going to talk and play. But
Okay.
That's fine.
So this right here, classic Spang-a-lang kind of pattern, right? But what if I were to put the snare drum, or put the bass drum rather, here every time? And then what if I were to put the snare drum funk, really funk. Now, instead of just making it swung, instead of doing it every time, I'll just do it like every other time. Now put the bass drum on a different note. Speed it up a bit, and you've got so from there you get quite easily into funk and different styles of music like that.
Yeah. 'Cause
Talking a bit about what you were saying before. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's like kind of like you were saying. It's like, and something that people, I've seen a bunch of videos now where it's like when like people will play to the backing tracks as a drummer,
Mhm.
and it's like, you know how many grooves they could have chosen to like make that iconic song.
Right.
Like I heard like Billie Jean, they were talking about, it's like, dude, check out all these. Like the drummer sat down, he played, you know, the Billie Jean and just did like a bunch of different types of grooves. All of a sudden, it's a whole different game.
I think the punk one's my favorite.
I mean, that's not bad. It makes me smile.
Right. But yeah, I mean, it's all about the notes that you choose to play and what you choose not to play. You know.
Well, and like kind of that thing you were talking about when you were moving, like that's one thing in my own drumming experience and stuff that's been so critical, and like something that I've, you know, whenever I kind of fall off the wagon of like my drumming,
Yeah.
it's like getting my bass drum, like to understand exactly how, like, because especially like with funk, like, you know, you hear the rock beat, the traditional rock beat, it's like 3 and 4,
Yeah.
and it's like, well, have you tried playing it like a, you know, play it on 4 and 1,
Right.
and then it's like boom,
Yeah.
boom,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. So that too. So you start getting into like funk from jazz and fusion and that kind of stuff, and you have kind of a return to, because you know what we talked about before, the music being kind of a combination of African rhythm and European harmony.
yeah.
You have kind of a return with certain drummers like Art Blakey, one of my personal favorite drummers. His claim, well, he has many claims to fame, but his beat that he's famous for is shuffle. Straight shuffle. Yeah, so that's kind of his main. I mean, he's an amazing player. In the 50s and 60s, I think, he kind of went more the traditional percussion route and went to Africa and studied with a bunch of African percussionists, and then converted to Islam, and then started kind of living that way.
Well, that kind of reminds me like Stuart Copeland.
Yeah.
Like the fact that he grew up in, was it not Saudi Arabia? Or was it? It was Middle Eastern.
Yeah,
So,
I think it was Saudi Arabia.
like, and he said that had a huge like influence on his drumming.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, just or
Well, really, I mean, hey, so reggae, you
Yeah.
know, reggae. It's one long drum solo. It really is. Like, listen to any Bob Marley song. Those drums, they're just.
it's like you have that one piece that you're like, all right, one is here.
It's part of it though. So that's that one drop. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. So you got that halftime feel. So you can.
Yeah.
See, it's the feel. It doesn't matter the
Yeah.
pattern, right? So, like, if I'm teaching somebody reggae for the first time that's never heard a reggae pattern, I would probably play. That's probably the first thing I would show them to do. Which that right there. Look at the right hand. Shuffle.
Shuffle beat.
So I can tell drummers that know how to shuffle and drummers that can't. My personal favorite types of drummers are drummers that have a good shuffle and swing background.
Yeah.
Because that sort of feel, that sort of pattern, is a lot harder to keep together. And
Well,
keep it in time.
Because it's
More
like
so
you're
than-
literally doing, it's like isolated. It's like you're having that, like, you lock that in,
Yeah.
and then everything else kind of moves interdependently.
So when you're talking about
You can just leave the mic on. It's fine.
okay, so when you're talking about traditional jazz from like the 40s to now, from a drumming perspective, this is your snare and kick drum
Mm.
right here. This one is, and then this is your other one, right? So in rock and roll, your emphasis is on the kick drum and snare drum, right? Kind of like early jazz.
Yeah.
Right? So your early emphasis is on the snare, actually. The snare drum is the most important instrument on the drum set.
Yeah.
The snare drum is the most important instrument on the drum set. So when you're setting up the drum set, make sure that you can play the snare drum easily. I'm not moving my core a lot. I'm not reaching to get to anything.
That floor tom is moving more than your core.
Exactly. Man, these drums really do sound good.
I mean, dude, for those that are wondering, it's a Starion.
Starion, like $200 Craigslist find, right?
It's something if I take to a bar and it gets like stolen,
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
But it's like could you just take the shells, not the heads?
But see, yeah. So here's the thing. So now here's another important thing too about just drums and cymbals and how it all works is that with a drum set, case in point, look at this piece of shit. You should be ashamed of yourself.
Right.
I'm kidding. You expect me to play on this? No, I'm kidding. But you take this, beat up secondhand drum set, put some professional heads on it, spend a couple of minutes tuning it,
Yeah.
and it'll sound great.
And especially like in a professional setting or like at a place that has like good mics and
Yeah.
things. It's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
You can do a lot with the production part of it, and it's
Yeah.
like, but again, it's like, for me as a primarily guitar player singer, it's like I like playing the drums just so I can have that musical understanding.
Right.
And it's like,
Now, is it fun to play the $5,000 drum set?
Hell
it
yeah.
is.
Hell yeah.
But like, if this is your option, then you can make these sound great, and these drums will last you forever if you take care of them. Cymbals are not that way.
True.
A cymbal is gonna just be that cymbal. So that's why, or at least that's the lie. The other hilarious lies I tell myself and my wife about my drum addiction. That's why I have 8 different ride cymbals.
Babe, the cymbal expired. It's like it's I got to get new ones.
This sound is not cymbally enough. I need a more cymbalier sound than this cymbal here,
Yeah.
But, that's not to say, too, like, you just work with what you were given. That's what the early jazz drummers did. They worked with what they had.
Well, yeah, the need to like kind of coalesce or like just consolidate like those 4 or 5 musicians into one.
Yeah.
And it's like, hey, it's like, I can do all these things. I can fill these needs and stuff like that. So,
Right.
That's how what's that old saying? The mother of innovation is like
Necessity.
Yeah.
Necessity is mother of invention. Yeah. And then from there, in jazz drumming anyway, you have the samba influence or the bossa nova influence too, which you talked about before.
Yeah, I was like, dude, once you started talking about bossas, sambas and stuff, I'm like, bro.
Samba. So anywhere besides the United States, it seems like they love percussion, especially in Latin American countries and South American countries. You go pick a country, Colombia, Brazil, wherever.
Yeah.
Their residents, run-of-the-mill people, know how to play patterns.
They got rhythm.
Yeah, because those patterns are pretty rich in their history. The bossa nova clave is similar to your Afro-Cuban one. You have that extra little pop there at the end. Whereas your Afro-Cuban clave might go something like
Doubles down on it a little bit.
like that. Your bossa nova clave like that, or no, that's a 2-3 or 3-2 rumba clave. But now I can't play it.
It's like when you start thinking about it.
Yeah. If you look at it, it's not there. If you don't think about it, it is. Schrodinger's clave. So from there, you bass drum. So still has a lot of elements of swinging here. You have your hi-hat on 2 and 4. And then if we switch to a similar style, a little different. samba, you basically have a jazz right finger in the right hand. If you were to swing it, it's just straight up sprang-a-lang. So in this case, it's 16th note and 8th note bass rather than triple bass. So this is the feel that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Right? So is this swing? No. This is not swung. This is straight.
It's a straight, like just right on it.
This is swung. Right? Now, is this jazz?
Is it?
Yes. Is this jazz?
No, man. Doesn't
It's
feel.
not swing.
It's not swinging.
It's definitely jazz, though. Right? Or it can be. To me it is. Maybe to you it isn't. But that's the point about it being jazz, right? So, from a drumming perspective, I start my students on this stuff pretty soon, incorporating the bass drum along with what you're doing on the hands.
Yeah.
There's a great book called Stick Control that's been around since like 1935.
Okay.
Was the first time it was printed. It's basically just a big book of just different hand patterns that you can play. A popular method of going about at least the first few pages, you have examples in there that, like the first two examples, the first one is right hand single stroke. Repeated a bunch. Left hand single stroke would be the second one, and then 2, 3, and 4 doubles. Right hand doubles, left hand, and then combinations of doubles, paradiddle, and then different variations of the paradiddle. So the paradiddle is 2 singles and a double.
Yeah.
Para are singles, diddle is double.
Left, right, right.
So in this case, you're going to orchestrate it right, left, right, right, left, right, left, left. But you can also orchestrate a paradiddle right, left, left, right, left, right, right, left. You can orchestrate it right, right, left, right, left, left, right, left. You can offset it by a 16th note. Right, left, right, left, left, right, left, right, right, left, right, left, left, right, left, right. As soon as I start counting and playing it faster, it falls apart, which is what I tell my students all the time too. So you have all of these different patterns, and then under that, you can play whatever you want with your feet, right? So what I like to do, and this is not an original idea, I got this from my teacher, and they got it from everybody else, since this book has been printed, is you just go samba or bossa, bass drum and hi-hat. So in this case, what I'm playing, if you're thinking about it in terms of 8th notes, it's 1, 2 and 3, 4 and 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 1, 2 and 3. A lot of times samba is in cut time. So you 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So you have this. It's sort of like. Yeah, exactly. So, one of my favorite things to do with this is to start with this and then play the first few examples of stick control. Make these patterns your bitch.
Yeah.
Left hand. And then that's not even getting into all the cool groove stuff you can do with it.
Yeah, because you can just throw the like kind of what you're doing on the different parts of the drums.
So think about there's an accent pattern that you can play on the snare drum. So you go. Put that on the right hand, and then. Let's speed it up. Or you go like this. Right? So that pattern is so useful. These patterns, based on the shuffle, blues.
Yeah.
So one of the first things I talk about with my students when we talk about jazz is the shuffle.
Yeah. Nothing groundbreaking here.
It's about the feel.
Well, like you were saying too, it's like the bedrock of like where you're starting out.
Yeah. Percussion-wise, personally, I started out on drum set first, and then moved into other areas of percussion.
Really? Okay.
So yeah, my dad showed me how to play drums when I was like in 5th grade, and I wasn't interested at the time. Yeah,
Heartbreaking, I'm sure to him.
didn't care. And then like later on, I kind of gravitated towards it. But your building blocks, like traditionally, many drummers come out of the school band sort of thing.
Yeah.
You know? So they have they know how to read, they know how to play all that stuff too. I think it's important to learn as much as you can about this instrument. There's a debate amongst people sometimes about whether or not reading is important. I think it is. I think it's very important.
As someone who's traditionally not been like, I haven't read sheet music since the school band, like you were saying.
Well, it's different on guitar.
And true.
It's a different thing on guitar.
But even like trying to like you've suggested too, like just like dabbling a little bit more in piano and stuff like that. It's like you can see a lot more of the bigger picture.
I would recommend anyone on any instrument, if they're serious about getting serious about music, that you study at least a little bit of the piano.
Yeah.
To understand at least how these things work.
Because, I mean, dude, the thing about the piano, like, guitar is great. A lot of people, I feel like it's more accessible to people, the guitar is. But, like, if you have the opportunity to get, like, a piano and, like, start there, I mean, the piano, it's, like, it's the perfect instrument.
Yeah.
Like, just because it combines all the elements.
All the elements.
I mean, it's got rhythm. It's, like, you know, some people argue it's a percussion instrument because... And it's like I can't argue against it because it's like I mean then you got like the clav or the marimba and other things like that. It's like you're hitting it like a piano and it's the same setup.
Yeah.
And it's like hey it's like you can do melodies all these different things. It combines all the elements of music into one like instrument for lack of a better term.
Yeah. And in music school, it was something that everyone had to take class piano. If you were a piano major, you could like flip out of it.
Yeah.
But you had to show enough proficiency to be able to do that.
Yeah.
I had to take jazz piano. I had to take arranging. I had to take. I didn't have to take orchestration. It's kind of the same thing, just on a classical realm.
Yeah.
But all those things later on, I spent more time doing that in school than I did playing drum set.
Wow.
Because I was so bad at it.
Well,
I was
yeah.
so bad. I had never taken a piano lesson before I got to college.
But it's like when you and me sit down and write songs and stuff, a lot of times when we're like hung up on a melody or like what chord changes, it's like we hop over to you, like sit down at the keys,
Yeah.
and we like, hey, well, oh, and then you start going and it's like, dude, you don't even know, Jared. There's a thing right here, and that part of it, when I see you go like really deep into that part of the music like writing process,
Yeah.
even as a guitar player, I'm like, all right, I got to figure out a little bit more how this all like works together, because I'll just sit there and I'll just.
Yeah.
Like I'll just like try to figure out stuff, or like just nah, I don't like that. Maybe do a minor chord, or
Yeah, it can be useful. It can also waste a bunch of time,
which
because
we've sat there and all right, let's go take a second. Let's go
too
for a
much,
walk. Let's go
too
for a walk.
much. Yeah, too much. Start simple, and that's why most drummers that you see play, from the guy from Ringo Starr uses 4 drums, to Tommy Lee or Neil Peart that have drums all around them. They all start from here. All starts from here.
And that's like my drum teacher. Like when I started, he's like, all right, you want to play that kit? Like he had like the Neil Peart like drum set, and like just had like all the, like the roto toms and stuff. Like
Mhm.
he had all, like, I mean, he had every size roto tom.
Yeah.
And he had them all tuned and stuff.
Yeah.
And he's like, once you can play all 13 of the basic rudiments
Yeah.
like perfectly, and like we can, he had this whole curriculum, but it's like it all started on the snare and practice pad. It's
Mhm.
like you got to do at least the first like month on this, and then if you hit
Yeah.
all the check marks,
Yeah.
then you can get on the 4-piece kit.
Yeah.
And then once I was able to like play along with like, a lot of things and do stuff, then he's like, all right,
Yep.
I will let you touch the master kit.
Right. You can sit behind it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And that progression is really crucial. Like kind of how and even like guitar playing, it's like it's like
It's sort of like a rite of passage when it comes to
Oh,
the
yeah.
student-teacher relationship.
it's like gotta have a carrot for you to like chase after,
Yeah,
like something.
Like everyone starts at this level. Everyone starts with these drums. Except if you're lucky, like in my case, I was very lucky. I had two. My grandpa and my dad were both drummers, and my
Yeah.
dad still had his '70s Vistalite, blue Vistalite drums.
Oh,
So that was my first kit.
oh, buddy.
But if you're not lucky, that's just pure luck, right? Like Maddie, my daughter, will be very lucky that she'll have a plethora of high-end drum sets to play if she wants to, and that's just lucky. That's just But like we said before, there's absolutely nothing wrong with a drum set like this.
Well,
You'll
and
get a lot of usage out of this kit.
I saw a band recently playing at a venue and stuff, and it was one of those venues, and it was one of the setups, or the gig there was multiple bands, so like a lot of bands will kind of trim off. It's like, okay, what do we
Yeah.
really need to bring? And what was funny is the drummer, he took off the tom tom. He just had the floor, snare, and kick.
Yeah.
And I'm like, all right. And I
I've
mean,
done so right now. My live rig, I just bought a new kit, so it's set up a bit different, but it's a 5-piece. I use 10, 12, 16, 22-inch kick, 14-inch snare, and I like cymbals, so I use a ride. I have 2 crashes, two hi-hats, and then I have an effect cymbal on this side. And I need to get something to fill in over here.
China.
Yes, actually, yeah. But I have also done the same gig, play with the same people at the same venue.
Yeah.
at a different time, where I was like, you know what, I don't feel like bringing all this crap inside today. So I bring a kick drum and a snare drum and a hi-hat, and then I'll bring 2 cymbals. I'll bring a ride and a crash.
Yeah.
So I have a difference of sound that way.
And I do think
And I can play the same gig
Yeah.
just as well with just those drums too. It's fun having all that stuff.
Oh,
I
yeah.
love having all that extra. I got a clap stack, I got a trash stack, I got 2 hi-hats.
Yeah, dude, the clap
Yeah.
stack seems to be really in right now.
Yeah, and it's fun to play all that stuff, but you don't necessarily have to have it.
Yeah.
You got to get this. Get this together.
I mean, like my drum teacher, he would do that sometimes. He's like, all right, today, I'd walk in, and then the kit it was,
Yeah.
it was 4-piece, and then I'd walk in, it was literally just hi-hat, snare, bass drum.
Bro, so I take lessons with a drummer in town named Darren Stanley. I haven't taken a lesson with him in a while, but every time we get together for a lesson, or at least the last time I got together with a lesson, he had his main kit set up for himself, which is like a 6-piece Gretsch set with cymbals everywhere,
Uh-huh.
and my set was kick drum, snare drum, hi hat, and ride.
It's like make do.
Yeah. So he was like, check all the stuff out that you can do on a fun drum set, but you're gonna do all the grunt work first. And
Yeah.
that's it. No one's getting away with anything.
Well,
know?
and I mean,
it's
if-
like now, you're. I would never say that you're a not serious person when it comes to music. You're very serious when it comes to music.
Try to be.
But now you see what it's like to actually be like a good player.
Oh
And
yeah.
how much it entails.
Well, seeing people that like I've seen street performers and people busking where they'll have like a bass guitar, or, like just a trio setup,
Yeah.
and the drummer is just literally hi hat, snare,
Yeah.
ride.
I've done gigs. There was a
Bass
gig.
drum.
I was on tour one time, and this particular gig that we had was outside, and it was just terrible weather outside. So
Yeah.
we weren't playing inside, and the only other place that we could fit was this really small like courtroom. It was like in the city's
like
downtown.
yeah, the
square.
downtown.
So we had to go into City Hall and play this gig, and we couldn't set up anything because we didn't bring any PA with us
Yeah.
because we weren't running that type of show.
Yeah.
So we didn't have any PA, so we had to plug in the bass amp, the guitar amp, a vocal mic, and then I literally just played a snare drum.
Wow.
I didn't play anything else, just a
Just-
snare.
Well, brushes or like did you like?
Yeah. So
like
in a drummer's bag, who's playing multiple different kinds of gigs, if you're playing in a singular band, you might not need all this stuff.
But yeah, if you're trying to like gig professionally, and
Yeah.
you got to kind of fit the scenario that they hire you for.
One of the things I get into with most of with all of my older students, more advanced students, is brushes. On this snare drum, it's rougher because you have this raised dot in the center, so it kind of catches on it.
Yeah.
You can still stay to the outside of it.
But for people who don't know, like the brushes is just literally like tiny like wires that are. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can push them out farther so they splay out farther. You can bring them in, and they just have a really cool sound on the drums and the cymbals. They won't make much noise on clear heads. So coated heads without a dot are the best type of head for a snare drum. For me, I'm a Remo drum head guy. I'm not sponsored by them, but I just like their heads, and I love Remo controlled sound reverse dot. So it's the same thing. It's very similar to a power stroke, which is what's on here now, but the dot is under the head, so you can play brush patterns a little bit easier. And then this right here, this power stroke head is a 2-ply, like heavy header pad for snare head, which sounds great. But the other one's like like 1-ply. It just sounds different. But brushes are cool because you don't have any bounce
Yeah.
to go with them.
You got to kind of like finesse it with your own hands and stuff.
So you got to use your wrists and your fingers. Now, I don't typically like to get brushes in the hands of younger drummers because they'll bend the crap out of these.
Oh yeah. Well, I've even seen some of the Vic Firth's brushes. They'll have like the tapered ends where
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah, I have a pair of those.
And it's like
Some of
the-
those are just made that way.
Yeah.
Those actually sound better on the cymbals because on the cymbal,
it hits them kind of more direct.
yeah, it's you don't get a very good cymbal sound this way. But from a pure technical perspective, I recommend every drummer practices with brushes because you have to make all the strokes. It comes from your wrists and your fingers, and then it's also very quiet.
One that I'm assuming, I don't know the history necessarily on like the innovation of the brushes, but I'm assuming before the electric guitar was made, it's like, hey, you can only play so loud as a percussionist, so it's like trying to like an acoustic, even the amps and stuff when electrics came out, it's like they can only get so loud.
Right.
So-
I think it was Warren Baby Dodds that did brushes first, or maybe it was Chick Webb. I can't remember which one. But these are young, like older, more traditional jazz drummers.
Yeah.
So before all the Spang-Lang stuff. But they would use like chimney brooms,
Really?
small little brooms,
Just something that,
to
yeah.
make that sound.
Because, I mean, conceptually, it makes sense when you're trying to play softer, because if you got just an upright bass and a piano and a drum as
Yeah.
a trio, it's like,
Now here's the thing about that too, is that, and I also brought these out, which are like sticks, but
yeah. Some people call them lightning rods, broomsticks, like,
yeah, I don't use these unless I need to play like a.
get a little more bounce on the sticks and
Like
stuff.
that. I don't ever. I try not to use these if I have to play quieter
Yeah.
because I don't.
Yeah.
That's just that ain't working. That's okay. That's okay, but I have to hit a rim shot.
Yeah.
So when it comes to playing, just play Just learn your dynamics.
Dynamics are a part of music.
If you can't get people to groove to this,
It's
then playing louder ain't gonna help.
Louder and faster, and you know, always think is you can just.
And as a drummer, you have to develop this a lot sooner
Yeah.
than a lot of other instruments do, especially a guitar. If you're playing an electric guitar, or an electric instrument, you don't have to worry so much about your velocity that you're playing with. You know?
Yeah, I mean, there is some to say. It's like if like for instance, like if you're playing something like that, play that little riff or like there's. So if I'm playing soft with you like that, it kind of fits the mood of it.
Yeah.
But if I come in and I'm just like. It's a whole different like attack on it. But woo, good save.
Yes. Now, there's a place for loud,
Oh yeah.
for sure. But if it's all loud, it's the same. Like it's having a conversation. You know, playing jazz when you're playing, especially playing spring lang, straight ahead. It's a conversation, right? You listen to solos. You have a lot of drummers within the style. You have many different players that will approach the same instrument, the same song sometimes, with the same musicians or a different way. Right?
Yeah.
So you have some guys that I was listening to on Spotify. They have a really good Blue Note records playlist that I was listening to. And the particular drummer that I was listening to was a guy named Billy Higgins.
Okay.
Who's in the jazz world is a legendary player. But he didn't deviate much from
The Sprangalang.
He just played that, just on the songs that I heard him playing on, you know. And he was playing pretty busy.
A lot on the snare.
Yeah. But he didn't really deviate much from this pattern. There's some people that play that same pattern and they'll accent, like Elvin Jones, one of my personal favorite drummers. He'll accent that upbeat. That's really his big accent. And he's got everything sort of works in time together.
Yeah.
You know? Some of my other favorite drummers, like Jimmy Cobb is one of my favorite drummers, and I saw him play at UNF years ago. And his playing style was a lot different then than it was when he was younger. But he kind of approaches the same way as like Billy Higgins would, where he's except he plays a lot more just straight quarter notes.
Just kind of
once in a while he'll play a skip beat, but just very. Right there. Out of the way.
Just simple. Holds the pocket.
Oh, yeah. Now, I've also heard Jimmy play. That happens too.
That is, and talking about dynamics, I remember that's kind of one thing I would always hear. It's like in some of the jazz tracks when I was learning drums and stuff. It's like you go from that really soft to the just boom.
Very melodically, you know, like
yeah.
Chops have a place. You know, you need to be able to play if you want to take it there. But melodically speaking, you know. lot of places you can go with it.
Yeah.
Because you're thinking more like in terms of a melody line instead of just chops based.
Yeah.
You know?
And it's always one of the most impressive parts. It's like you'll be playing, like, the band will be doing this thing. And then the drum break will come out, and then the band just... And then they just all...
Yeah. And that's just a good testament to your musicians that you play with too. You know, a lot of times it depends on who I'm working with. If I'm working with a band for the first time, I'm not gonna play a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
And if I'm working with if I'm working in a cover band, or if I'm working in a wedding, something like that, you got to pick your spots carefully.
Oh, yeah.
You know, but it's fun when you do that.
Well, it's like that delayed gratification. It's like, all right, I know my big moments in the song, or like if you're taking it from the song perspective or the set list, it's like when there's that moment, it's coming up. I have to just wait.
Yeah.
And when the moment arrives, I seize the day.
Well, as a musician too, you know, drummers, we talk a lot about playing in the pocket drummers.
Yeah.
And I think what a lot of people think is,
it's like, all right, there it is, and then.
But it's hard to play. Right, that's still pocket.
Yeah.
I'm still in time.
Yeah, I'm just playing the same thing. I just got to keep everything the same on my end, and it's like.
Point being, pocket is you do what's right for the song.
Exactly.
If you need to chop, be able to do that. But if you need to play, be able to do that too.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
Man.
Now, there's certain drummers out there that play a certain way, and that's amazing that they have their own style. They're usually playing with a band, or they're playing in a singular style of music.
Yeah.
If you're looking to be more of an all-around player, like I enjoy working with you, working with blues, rock-based music. I enjoy working with other musicians that are more jazz-based. You know, I just like different styles of music.
Well, and also
so be able to play lots of different things.
Yeah.
As a player.
And and also that's the thing. It's like when you play and as a guy that's played a lot of cover gigs like you have, you and me both. It's like when you get a cover gig, then they throw a song and they're like, oh, I haven't tried that before.
Yeah.
It's like you get to kind of taste around the different styles, and I mean, and especially like I've always said this to my bass players and drummers is like, bro, if you get as good as you can be and you are able to just do the job that's called on you, you'll never be out of work.
Yeah.
I mean, you see that in your own life and experience. It's like you're always gigging and stuff, and people. The few times I've had to call you because we've had something happen with oh, hey man, we got a gig that came up last minute. Are you available? And you're like, actually I am. I'm like, oh thank God, thank God. It's like I love Ethan and he does great on all the stuff, but it's like when I sometimes get these last minute calls and stuff, he's like, well dude, I mean it's like this is the one trip I'm taking with my family. I'm like, well, okay, I just had to ask.
Yeah. And to be fair, he doesn't do this for a living either. If you do it for a living, you have to my goal was to be a professional musician. I didn't want to do another job.
Yeah, I'm trying to drag them out of their jobs and to do that.
Yeah, I mean, man, it's
hard. It's a hard step.
It's a choice that you make, and it's not one that you're necessarily ready to or you don't understand what you're getting yourself into, because it sounds great, right? It sounds great, but if you don't have ask anybody on the street, would you like to wake up at 10 o'clock in the morning and jam with someone for 3 hours and consider that work, and then go teach a couple of lessons and then be home to tuck your daughter in at night and make a shit ton of money doing it? Hell yeah. Who wouldn't want to do that?
Or wake up, go to a studio that's got all this stuff go
to the studio, cut some track, get paid to do it sometimes. That sounds great. But you know what else you had to deal with? You had to deal with eating ramen noodles for months at a time and living in a house with 7 other people because you can't afford shit, you know.
Yeah.
So like you sacrifice a lot. I drove a 1999 Camry for 15 years.
It's like
You know, like,
driving these cars until they die.
It's not a sacrifice that a lot of people are willing to make.
Oh yeah.
And so that then you dwindle it down even further. So you get guys that are amazing talents, but they're not willing to make sacrifices to get there.
Yeah. And just to clarify, because I know Ethan listens to the podcast, I love you, Ethan. We're not talking about you specifically.
No, of course not. No. And look, everybody's path in life is different.
Oh yeah.
And there's not anybody better than anybody else. And it's just the choices that you make and what you're okay with.
Yeah.
That will lead you down your perspective path, you know? So if you choose to be a professional musician, you and whoever you're with also has to understand, like, my wife grew up with people that played music, sort of understood what was going on.
Yeah.
I don't think she really got it until she was, like, in it. And then at that point, she couldn't say no anymore.
It's like you're already married, baby.
So there's a lot of time spent away from family. You know, there's a lot of time I don't get to see my daughter.
Yeah.
I work sometimes 36 hours. Sometimes I work 2 hours. It's just, it kind of depends on what I need to do that day. But that hustle, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're, like, for me, I'm born to be a hustler. I like to hustle shit, right? I like to find my own gigs. I like to find my own students. I like to play with my own people, you know?
Yeah.
If I need $50, I'll go hustle up a student or a gig, you know? I'm not saying that, like, at least I don't think I am, like a shyster or anything like that.
Yeah,
I'm
no.
just busy. I'm just working, you know? I'm trying to get stuff done.
Yeah, I mean, and I have that same feeling too. It's like, you know, it's like, like the next couple of months are looking a little light. I got to pay bills.
Hustle.
It's like, all right, well, just
Get
start.
it together. No one cares. Like, you if you want to be a player, great. I don't care. Like, do it or not.
It's like, but if
You
you're
know?
going to do it, do it.
Do it and, like, learn as much as you can about it, and constantly learn from people. And the other thing is too is if someone comes up to you and says you could learn a lot or use lessons, it is probably actually the highest compliment that you can have.
Yeah, they're like, hey man, I can see that you've got talent, and it's like
You just need someone to form it better for you.
it's like the artist that sees the block of marble, and it's like, I can see what's going to be the beautiful sculpture.
That's what my grandpa said to me. He's like, I've taken you as far as I can go, and he's like, you really need some lessons. And I was like, what do you mean? I sound good. And he was like, no, you don't. But
It's like
but the point is that, like, you're good enough. Like, if you weren't good enough, I wouldn't even bother.
Yeah.
Because you're gonna waste his time.
Yeah,
you know?
it's like if you're just gonna have some little boop boop boop, and that's all you're gonna do. It's like, all right, well,
Yeah.
cool, that's it. But if
That's
you're trying
fine.
to push into
Yeah.
other, like, even
Learn
like
about it.
well, like another thing too that you've talked about a lot is how you always are, you know, pushing in other areas, and that's one of the things that's really helped me. You and me.
It's just colder water.
Yeah, no, it's just I could hear it. I was like, you lean away. It's like, nope, still hear it. Yeah, it's like that was his water bottle for anyone that's on the sound that you'll hear. But like, I mean, kind of like wrapping it up here, I guess is like, but I mean, there's so much that you can do, and you can always push yourself to the next thing. I mean, like you were talking recently, you've been really getting into the Afro-Cuban beats,
Yeah.
and really challenging yourself. And then even me personally, in the last couple months in my music journey, it's like being around you and some of the other players you've introduced me to, and being around people that are doing this on that next level and seeing what it takes. It's like I'm like we were talking before we got rolling. And it's like, dude, I'm so highly motivated right now to just like play more. I was like, I got to do so much right now.
Yeah.
It's like do it, and it's like, okay, cool. But it's just like, you know, even Seabass, like he's been talking about working out, and like, you know, a couple of my friends, like I always tie things back to weightlifting and stuff. It's
Yeah.
like, you don't see the results until months down the road. Like
Right.
you don't see the changes as they're happening. It's the same way like we talked earlier. It's like, when did the drum kit happen? It just kind of happened.
Yeah.
It's like it's going to
Yeah.
be the thing. But if you're willing to sacrifice and push and like just like go to the quote unquote musical gym every day,
Yeah,
next thing you know, you're going to be that guy that everyone's like, dude, I wish I could play like you. And you're like, what are you talking about? Just playing, man.
Yeah.
It's like, no, dude, you're like playing.
You don't see the hard work that goes into it. You see the product
Yeah.
on the stage, you know, but you don't see the years and years of dedication that went into it. You know, you don't see all the stuff you don't hear all the rejected cuts. From the album.
Yeah.
You know, like there are plenty of, for every great song, there's 10 terrible songs that they tried to write, you know?
Yeah, dude. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You have no idea what led them to that, you know? So you learn the most you can. Learn the absolute most that you can about it. If it's something that you're interested in, you know, learn everything about it. Learn where it comes from. Learn the history. Learn your your important people. In guitar, you've got Les Paul,
Yeah.
Jimi Hendrix, guys like that you got to study and figure out. And drumming, you got your Buddy Rich, you got your John Bonham,
Don't forget your Steve Gadd.
Steve Gadd. Yeah, I mean, guys that you don't even know about, that many people don't know about, like Hal Blaine from the Wrecking Crew. It's on thousands of recordings.
Oh, yeah.
So
And I mean, dude, but yeah, I don't know. So I guess like at the end, it's like, how do we want to wrap this up? You want to just play us out a little bit?
Yeah.
Like just jam a little bit?
yeah, that sounds good.
But dude, before we do the jam, it's like again, NicoLambomusic.com.
NicoLambomusic.com.
So if you guys are looking to get better at drums or just dive into music as a whole, definitely feel free to reach out to that. And yeah, like we'll hopefully do some more of these and keep a lookout for the Strange Herd's other page, the Jared Monday Music Studios, JMMP Studios. We'll try to do some more stuff like this as we grow. And if you know some musicians that want to get on and talk about their songs, definitely feel free to shoot us a message and we'll get some stuff going, man.
Yes,
But
sounds great.
So let's play some jazz, brother.
Sounds good. All right.
Let one reel come on. Thank y'all for watching.